Jeff, Zach, thanks for joining me.
Hey,
Hey,
Steve, good to
Steve.
see you.
Hey, we are talking about some stabilization in the office market, as well as some data that really points to some differences here between what's going on with some of the larger tenant type spaces, particularly in urban cores and other areas. But I'm just going to give some of this data we're seeing from CoStar, and that is that renewals are definitely going better than they have recently. Renewal agreements have already collectively put on more than 14.1 million square feet. A lot of that is coming from companies like Bank of America, Fannie Mae, Bain Capital, Verizon. Those companies and those like them are accounting for about almost half of the 156 leases spanning 100,000 square feet. Tenants collectively signed on for about 395 million square feet last year. Now that's about 13% below the annual average pre-COVID. And those deals are coming in about 16% smaller. Um, but we're seeing upward companies of with those large employees actually trending more positive. Nearly 40% of those CBRE latest office occupiers um, have their spatial requirements have come up compared to where they were last year. We're seeing about 80% of those respondents, those large providers, considering renewals to avoid the high cost of moving out of space. So we're seeing some good things here. It seems like there's some stabilization in the market, and that maybe things are getting a little better than where they have been.
Yeah, look, I think we've talked about this in the past. The indicators that we look at a lot of times are lagging indicators. So we're seeing, hey, COVID and pandemic, we need less space. People are telecommuting. Office is going to die. And what we saw and what isn't represented in this article is the amount of office space that's been converted as well. So there's less office space out there in terms of the supply side, but in terms of the demand side, the way that space is being used and being repurposed, people are using potentially less space, but it doesn't mean they're not using the space. We've always known that office is going to survive and it's becoming more experiential, and that's what we're seeing. The amount of space that is being requested and required from a lot of these companies has increased. And I think as a lagging indicator, you won't see that until the 24 numbers come out next year. And I think you're going to see that the rebound is probably better than anticipated, and that the death of office might have been a little bit overstated compared to what was originally reported.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe probably want to add to it is that, I think people are trying to, you said experiential. I might say that, people are trying to reconfigure how they use the space. I'm not saying that there's some sort of, adding more people to a smaller space, but I think people are getting a little bit more creative with the space as well, so that it's experiential, not just from the building perspective, from the tenant perspective. But the other side is, like most of these articles, they paint a broad stroke across the United States or across the nation without kind of giving consideration to, some of these smaller, or well, I shouldn't say smaller, some of these markets really, individual markets play a deeper role than, you know, are a greater role in some of these numbers than other markets do too.
Yeah, I think one of the data points that was really positive that popped out here was that 40% of the respondents expect to increase their space requirements over the next three
That's right.
years compared
Yeah.
to what it was 20% the previous year. So it does look like in the kind of large tenant market, we're kind of getting to the point where most folks are staying pat. Where it seems to be there's still some room for change is those larger tenants may be looking to upgrade their space, which definitely talks to what you guys are talking about in terms of experiential. They want a better environment for the workers. But I do think also this kind of goes to another point you guys are bringing up. This is very focused on, and a lot of the coverage has been very focused on these huge tenants, these big companies, and that's where we've maybe seen some of the biggest changes in moving, some of the biggest changes in space requirements, some of the biggest changes in kind of terms of remote work or COVID policy and all that. And I think there's a lot more stability when you look outside there, kind of towards those smaller, less glamorous tenants.
Yeah.
that are maybe small businesses or small organizations, or maybe like we have like some government tenants and stuff like that. But a mix that really just hasn't had this kind of variability and big changes. So I still think we've
Well,
kind of got different office markets going on here.
yeah,
Yeah.
the only other add to that probably is that, realistically, people were looking at COVID from what's the long-term effect in opposition to, now here we are a couple of years outside of it and people are like, well, we're going to decrease our space and they're going to decrease their space during COVID because, people were working from home and now they realize the inefficiencies and the desire to have people back in the workspace. So now they're having to get back to where they were or greater.
Well, another
So
another thing that is not represented in this, twofold. One, the supply of the labor market is increasing.
yeah,
So just at a bare minimum, you're going to need more space for more bodies. That's just basic logic. And the other side here that isn't being represented is there might be less space that is being taken, which again I think is being over exaggerated. But the rent that's being paid is tremendously higher. So the economic occupancy, right? I might be 93% running 93% pre-COVID on an economic basis. Post-COVID, I might be 89% or even 88%. But my economic occupancy at these higher rates and passing through the expenses, everything else, might be closer to 95 or 98% economically occupied.
right.
So less space taken, better positioning, better financial, safety for the buildings.
Yeah, I would just also say in closing, we talked about some of the other trends going on here that help some markets hurt some other markets. And it kind of like just, yeah, flattens out on a national basis. But COVID accelerated trends we were already seeing, trends like towards the Sun Belt. And we recently talked about like, Dallas becoming a financial center hub. Well, those jobs come at the cost of another area, or the move towards the suburbs. And certainly when millennials with home formation, that was going to happen. So there's definitely been some urban cores. We've talked about San Francisco, some of the social policies causing issues, and that maybe creates winners in other areas. So I think that also sometimes we get some bad coverage here where it just looks at an area that's hurting an office and it doesn't look at the areas where, okay, sometimes those tenants didn't go away, they just moved.
Yeah,
And doesn't look at like where did they move to. So
right,
yeah, I think this is good news for stabilization. But also I think we've all talked about how office as a category hasn't been as bad as people talk about, because sometimes the focus is on specific markets where people just move to other markets.
That's
right.
right.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Hey, if you like the video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and visit our website, selectfincap.com, and get on our newsletter, subscribe to see exclusive real estate investment opportunities. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thanks.
you.